Last year, it was reported that Barcelona FC sold 10% of its La Liga broadcasting rights over the next 25 years to an investment firm named Sixth Street. Is this the full story? How was the transaction accounted for? And was the accounting treatment accepted by La Liga? What does the future hold under the La Liga structure for Barcelona and under the UEFA financial fair play or financial sustainability regulations? And what is stopping every club in Europe doing exactly the same thing to comply or circumvent the rules, be it domestically or at the UEFA level? Stay tuned as we explore all these questions and more in our latest YouTube video. My name's Neil Wood and I'm a football finance professional. This channel, Football Finance Professionals, is dedicated to teaching you about finance through the medium of football. So whether you have ambitions to work in the football industry or just want to learn about finance concepts using a topic that you love, why not subscribe to learn more? And if you like the video, hit like, share with your friends and comment with ideas or feedback, which are more than welcome. On the 30th of June 2022, Barcelona sold 10% of 25 years worth of La Liga broadcasting rights to a separate company. It wasn't Sixth Street, but it was an entity named Loxley Invest SL, an entity that Sixth Street holds a 51% stake in and Barcelona itself holds a 49% stake in. The transaction generated 266 million euros of income for the club. But if the games haven't been played, haven't been recorded, and those performance obligations haven't been extinguished by the club, how could it possibly generate any income and record that in the income statement? Let's look into the transaction a little bit further. And for those accountants or finance professionals out there, this one is interesting, so stay tuned. Anybody with a background in accounting and finance will understand the concept of revenue recognition. And from a football club's perspective, it means extinguishing performance obligations. So whether that's on a match day, extinguishing that obligation to a fan entering the stadium by allowing them in and playing a game, or whether it's broadcasting rights by allowing that game to go ahead, the club competing on the pitch, allowing the broadcasting company to film, produce, record and broadcast that football game, or allowing sponsors to advertise on pitchside LEDs. These are all contractual obligations of the club that allow it to recognise revenue in exchange for extinguishing that obligation. The concept of revenue recognition under International Accounting Standards or IFRS is broadly the same across all other accounting principles. So how can Barcelona recognise any revenue for a transaction for the next 25 years of broadcasting revenue, albeit a 10% share? Well, the answer is they can't, and they haven't. They've not recognised revenue at all. The amount of revenue that's recognised in the year ended 30th of June 2022, or even the year thereafter, when another 15% of Barcelona's La Liga broadcasting rights were sold in the following financial year, equated to zero revenue once again. So how could it be possible for this to contribute towards La Liga's financial fair play position, or even beyond that in UEFA's? Was it cash accounting that allowed income to be generated? After all, 207 million euros was received by Barcelona from Sixth Street via Loxley SL. Well, surely there's a difference there to begin with. 207 million euros of cash versus 266 million euros of income. We'll explain that in just a moment. Revenue wasn't recognised and it was nothing to do with the cash transaction. What actually happened was a sale of intangible assets. Barcelona sold 10% of its right to receive broadcasting monies from La Liga. It sold a future right, something that didn't even exist in a monetary value on its balance sheet. And from the initial sale between Barcelona and Loxley Invest SL being 10% of the next 25 years of broadcasting rights, what it means is that Barcelona's income from La Liga's broadcasting rights will have reduced to 90%, with the additional 10% that's been sold being recognised as revenue in a separate legal entity as those games are being played and as the performance obligations are being extinguished. So we've effectively split the transaction and brought forward some income. Now that income is going to vary based on the on-pitch performance of the team in La Liga. History says that Barcelona finished in the top two, and therefore take the lion's share of La Liga's broadcasting rights. So although this is a gamble for Sixth Street and Loxley Invest SL, it's probably a measured gamble, assuming that Barcelona can continue to compete on the pitch. But what's this difference between the income that's being recognised and the cash that's being received? 207 million euros of cash versus 266 million of income. Well, what wasn't as widely reported as the initial transaction, which was a headline of the 10% of the 25 years of broadcasting rights being sold to Sixth Street, was this intermediary of Loxley Invest SL. But by building this transaction and selling the rights to an intermediary company, of which Barcelona controls 49%, it allowed a negotiation to buy back its own rights from year 26 onwards, which explains the difference between the 266 million euros worth of income on sale of the intangible asset and the cash being received from Sixth Street. But what's the auditor's point of view? And how does this look in the financial statements? First of all, we can see from Barcelona's financial results that we have a capital gain for the alienation of non-sport intangible assets of 266 million euros. Now this is a non-sports intangible asset. We're not talking about player registrations, we're talking about the right to receive broadcasting monies from La Liga. We can see this presented in multiple parts of the financial statements ending 30th of June 2022. This section here is where we can see that on the 30th of June 2022, 10% of the club's audio-visual rights over La Liga's professional competition was sold to Loxley Invest SL, in which the club holds a 49% stake. The transaction generated a profit of 267 million euros in the club's consolidated profit and loss account. During the month of July 2022, as stated in note 24, the club sold a further 15%. So within the financial statements of Barcelona, we can quite easily see that there's actually a profit of 267 million euros, with probably some costs taken off for that transaction to net it down to 266 that we've seen previously. In note 10.3 of the financial statements, we can see that Loxley Invest SL has an addition of 61 million euros, which is approximately equivalent to the 59 million euros that was generated by the club in addition to the cash that was received from Sixth Street. That means that the club has effectively debited its balance sheet by 59 million or about 60 million euros and credited its income statement with the same figure, with the investment of what is effectively a joint venture, a partially controlled entity, being the difference between what is being generated as income. Once again, we can see the acknowledgement of the transaction here with Loxley Invest SL, 267 million euros as a transaction with an associated party due to the investment from Barcelona in that legal entity. But has this transaction been accepted by La Liga? It seems, based on reports of how the transaction has been constructed, that La Liga has accepted the 207 million euros of cash that's been injected into the club via Loxley for the sale of its future broadcasting rights at the level of 207 million euros. The difference, which has effectively created profit from an accounting perspective, has been disregarded by La Liga according to reports. Further reference is being made to note 6 of the financial statements. So if we flick to see what's happening there, we'll be able to understand how this transaction has happened on the balance sheet from a disposal point of view. On screen, we can see note 6, and unfortunately, this is a typo. This should say 2021. The opening balances at 2020 with the closing balances of 2021 then translate into the opening balances in 2021 here, with additions, disposals, and transfers to get the closing balances on the right-hand side for 2022. So if we look at what's being disposed of from Barcelona's perspective, it would be audio-visual property rights with a cost of 4.2 million euros at the opening balance of 2021. That balance is approximately the same at the end of June 2022, with additions of 25,000 and no disposals or transfers in between. The amortization at the opening balance is 1.4 million, with some additional amortization in the year, a slight rounding or adjustment, which may be where this transaction has been accounted for, and a closing balance to net off to around about 2 million euros, which can be seen on the face of the balance sheet. This is the element of the balance sheet that's being disposed of in order to generate a profit of 266 million euros, or what's been discounted to 207 million euros as part of La Liga's FFP break-even assessment. Absolutely nothing has been disposed of off that balance sheet. This is an intangible asset that has no cost associated to it because we're talking about the future economic rights. They've cost Barcelona nothing at all. So they've effectively created a contract to sell a future intangible asset to another party. But what's the auditor's view on this matter? It's quite clear that it's high up on their agenda because it's the first item that they report on as part of the audit report. The key matter that the auditors want to draw out is in this paragraph here. The recognition of this income and the analysis of the contractual terms and conditions of the transaction which have served as the basis for determining the accounting entry thereof has been considered as a most relevant aspect of the audit, due to the significance of the amount, complexity and the impact of the attached consolidated annual accounts. That quite clearly says that this matter was not straightforward. The auditor wanted to ensure that the accounting treatment was correct. What the club has effectively done is brought forward income, and the accounting around that can be quite complex. It could quite easily have been defined as a financing transaction, but the auditor has the view of all the contractual terms and can make an assessment as to what has happened as part of this transaction. And there's quite clearly a sale that's happened between two parties, which has helped Barcelona to recognise the income, and that's been supported by way of what we can read here by their auditors. But what's the role of an auditor as part of a football club? Is it to assess the financial submission to the league, or is it to express an opinion to shareholders on the presentation of the financial statements as being true and fair? It's the latter. Auditors generally do not opine on financial fair play submissions. All they will do is draw a line at the financial statements, which forms the basis of the financial fair play submission. So there is some reliance that will be placed by La Liga on this audit opinion, but it's not its intended purpose. Its intended purpose is quite clearly to serve the shareholders. And that's generally because there is a separation between shareholders and those that run the business in any other organization, particularly listed companies. And Barcelona's model of ownership is a membership model, where Catalonians own the club. And therefore, those individuals do not make the day-to-day decisions to run the club. Those decisions are made by the board of directors. So this relationship between the shareholders, the board of directors and the auditors is quite key, because the auditors must express an opinion on how the financial statements have been prepared. What's interesting further down in the audit opinion is the emphasis paragraph, which discusses the going concern status of the club. Going concern being the assessment as to whether the club will continue to trade in its current form 12 months from the date of signing the audit opinion. And this point often focuses around liquidity. And what's noted is that a further 15% of the audiovisual rights has been sold by the club in order to assist the liquidity position of the club. It's often said that cash is king, but actually cash is worthless. It's liquidity management that is king, and the optimum level of cash that any club or any organization wants at the end of each day is zero. Cash is there to serve a purpose, and it's to acquire future income-bearing assets in an ideal scenario. This emphasis paragraph would not be unusual across football, but it is worth noting that the auditors have acknowledged a post-balance sheet event or subsequent transaction to sell a further 15% of the 25 years worth of broadcasting rights. What's far and away the most interesting figure in the budget is a 400 million or just shy of 400 million profit on the disposal of intangible non-sporting assets, i.e. nothing to do with players, but this is the 15% sale of the future 25-year broadcasting rights from La Liga. And without this transaction, a profit becomes a loss from Barcelona's perspective on a consolidated basis. It's interesting that the football results will be loss-making, but adding in the extras and the additional amounts, particularly from a 400 million euro disposal, it can turn a footballing loss into a profit. So based on what we've discussed so far, it looks as though Barcelona will comply with La Liga's FFP regulations. But what does this mean from UEFA's perspective? Surely a tick from La Liga equals a tick from UEFA. That's not necessarily the case. And is there a future problem being stored up by Barcelona on the European stage? Let's look a little bit further into that. Helpfully, Barcelona have created a PowerPoint presentation for its members that's publicly available. So we're just going to have a quick look into the structure of what's being proposed. And we can see here the initial transaction of the 10% of the men's professional league rights being sold for 25 years for the revenue that's being generated, 266 million euros, of which 207 million is being provided by Sixth Street. The difference being that accounting entry that's effectively being booked by Barcelona. Debit the balance sheet on the investment side, credit income being the disposal of intangible assets. Helpfully, we can see the structure here. And from UEFA's perspective, this, being the football club, will have traditionally been what's defined as the reporting perimeter, assuming that all football activities are being included within that legal entity. UEFA's rules define a reporting perimeter on which the financial statements and financial results must be prepared. And that's based around a concept of football activities. Football activities being listed on screen, which include broadcasting quite clearly. Without going into too much detail, we can see that entities included in the legal group structure, which generates revenue or performs services or incurs costs in respect of the following activities reported in C to K below, which includes broadcasting. That means that Loxley Invest SL, which now holds 10% or even 25% in the year after the initial sale, will be classified as an legal entity that sits within the group structure of the wider entity of Barcelona and its further subsidiaries or other interests, and that will therefore be defined as the reporting perimeter. So what Barcelona will have to do is add the financial results of these two entities together on a consolidated or combined basis and report this to UEFA, which means any transactions between the two companies need to be eliminated. And effectively, what's happened is Barcelona has transacted with one of its associated companies to create a profit of 267 million euros or 207 if we discount the amount that's been generated by itself by buying those rights back. Now, whether we're talking about 207, which is effectively the cash that's being generated from Sixth Street, or the 267, it's unlikely that this amount is going to be able to be reported to UEFA for the purposes of the financial sustainability regulations. However, the first transaction, being this one, was under the old FFP rules. The second transaction, which happened in 22-23, being the 15% sale of 25 years of broadcasting rights for 400 million or 311 million in cash, with the difference again being an accounting entry made by the club, that falls under UEFA's financial sustainability regulations in the season 22-23. That season in its isolation is not being assessed by UEFA, but it does form part of the next reporting cycle, a monitoring period which will be built up from 22-23 onwards for 2 years and 3 years thereafter. That means that this transaction and the previous transaction will not be being assessed in terms of the income, on the basis that Loxley Invest forms part of Barcelona's reporting perimeter. We can't guarantee that for sure, but it's up to UEFA to define whether that transaction will or won't be included. And the likelihood is that it won't be. So Barcelona, although it seems to have generated a transaction that La Liga accepts, it's unlikely that UEFA will accept the same treatment. UEFA's rules are there to prevent this type of transaction. Although La Liga's rules intend to try to prevent this type of transaction, it looks as though it's been accepted. And the future of Barcelona is being put at risk in exchange for profit being generated immediately, which is the exact opposite of the financial sustainability regulation intentions both at the UEFA level and what I believe the La Liga rules are there to do. So what are your thoughts on this transaction? Do you think that clubs should be able to bring forward income at will, as long as there's a separate party there to pay or contribute towards that transaction. There's no guarantee that Barcelona will win or come second in La Liga. There's no guarantee of the income being generated by Loxley Invest SL, but with Barcelona owning almost 50% of it, the risk to Sixth Street is limited. But surely this type of transaction can be created by any entity that has access to future broadcasting rights, on the assumption that it still continues to compete in that competition. Is this right, and could Barcelona be setting a trend for other clubs? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like. My name's Neil Wood and I'm a football finance professional. Thanks for watching.